Priya opened her banking app on Friday morning, the same quiet payday ritual she repeated every 2 weeks. Her salary said $90,000 a year, printed right there in bold on the offer letter. But the number that had just landed in her account was $2,611. She stared at it, did the quick mental math, and felt her stomach drop just a little. $90,000 a year should really feel like a lot more than this, shouldn't it? She had even gotten a raise back in March, a real one, $7,000 on paper. Yet somehow her checking account never once seemed to notice that the raise had actually happened. Here's the thing that almost nobody bothers to explain to you before your very first real job. The big number printed on your offer letter was never actually yours to keep in the first place. Your paycheck isn't lying to you to be cruel about it. It is lying to you entirely by design. And once you finally see the real number hiding underneath, you honestly can never quite unsee it again. Most people quietly assume their entire paycheck problem is simply that they don't earn quite enough money. That is the comfortable story we all like to tell ourselves, and it is usually the wrong one. Because the real gap between what you actually earn and what you get to keep is enormous. For the average American worker, taxes alone quietly eat about 30% of the total labor cost. That is not a typo on the screen, and it is not some rare, unlucky edge case. The OECD calls it the tax wedge, and back in 2024 it sat at 30.1%. That is 30 cents out of every single dollar of labor cost, gone before you ever touch it. Then come all the deductions that you personally signed up for and then quietly forgot about. Health insurance, dental coverage, the 401k contribution, the vision plan, and that old commuter benefit. Each one of them is small, each one is perfectly reasonable, and together they add up shockingly fast. By the time your paycheck finally hits, you keep only roughly 70 to 78% of it. So a $90,000 salary can very easily end up spending like a $65,000 life. Nobody ever warned you about any of this because the offer letter only shows the biggest number. The real number, the one you actually have to live your whole life on, hides one layer down. So before you blame your salary for everything, here is exactly what the hard data actually shows. Let's put one real paycheck down on the table and carefully take it apart, line by line. Meet Priya, 32 years old, a project manager earning $90,000 a year on paper. She lives in a perfectly normal city, rents a normal apartment, and drives a paid-off Honda Civic. On paper, $90,000 divided across 26 paychecks comes out to $3,462. That is the exact number that Priya fully expected to see land every other Friday morning. The number she actually sees every single time is only $2,611. That is a yawning gap of $851 on every single paycheck she gets. Spread out over a full year, that gap is more than $22,000 she never once touches. So where on earth does all of that money actually go? Let's follow it all the way down. First up, federal income tax takes by far the biggest single bite out of her whole check. On Priya's particular income, that federal bite works out to roughly $420 per check. Next comes Social Security at 6.2%, running like clockwork with absolutely no exceptions. That quietly removes another $215, handed straight over to the payroll system. Then Medicare takes 1.45%, another $50 quietly removed without any fanfare. Together, Social Security and Medicare make up the 7.65% that everyone just calls FICA. Priya never actually sees any of that money. It leaves before her paycheck is even printed. Then her home state steps in and takes its share, roughly $160 this time. Add every one of those up, and taxes alone have already taken about $845. But those taxes are honestly only about half the real story of the vanishing paycheck. Because before the taxes even get a chance to start, her pre-tax deductions came out first. Her 401k contribution of 6% quietly pulls $207 out of every check. Now that one is actually Priya paying her own future self, which is genuinely a good thing. But it still leaves her checking account today, so on payday it honestly still just feels like less. Her health insurance premium quietly takes another $190 out of each paycheck. Dental and vision add 30 more, small enough to ignore, yet big enough to genuinely matter. A commuter benefit that she set up years ago and never revisited quietly takes another $40. She had totally forgotten that one even existed. It has been leaving for 3 whole years straight. Now stack every single one of those deductions together and watch the whole 90,000 dream shrink. Gross pay per check starts at the full $3,462, minus all of the pre-tax deductions, and she is already down to about $3,000. Minus federal, state, and FICA taxes, and she lands right down at $2,611. That very last number is quite literally the only one Priya actually gets to go out and spend. Now here is exactly where the comparison trap quietly sneaks in and makes the whole thing so much worse. Priya has a coworker named Denise, 34 years old, with the exact same title and the same salary. Denise is always posting vacations, a brand new couch, dinners out, and a fancy weekend up in Napa. Priya looks at every bit of it and quietly assumes that Denise must simply be earning much more. She doesn't earn more. Denise takes home the exact same real number that Priya does every payday. Denise just happens to fund that entire glossy lifestyle with a credit card that Priya never sees. So the paycheck lies to you first, and then the highlight reel lies right on top of it. You are not actually behind. You are comparing your quiet bank balance to somebody else's public performance. Priya's real problem, it turned out, was never once actually the size of her salary at all. Her real problem was simply that she had never once actually looked at her real number directly. Most people go their entire working careers quietly making this exact same expensive little mistake. They budget their whole lives against the big number, the one that was honestly never even theirs. Run the numbers just once, and the whole lie becomes completely obvious in about 10 short minutes. Subsection 1 is the marginal tax myth, and this one quietly costs regular people very real money. Priya once actually turned down extra overtime purely because she was scared of jumping a tax bracket. You have almost certainly heard someone insist that a raise unfairly pushed them into a higher bracket. They talk as if their entire paycheck suddenly gets taxed at the brand new, much higher rate. That idea is completely, totally false, and quietly believing it can honestly cost you many thousands of dollars. The United States runs a marginal tax system, which simply means it taxes your income in separate slices. Only the specific dollars that land above a bracket threshold ever get taxed at that higher rate. Every single dollar sitting below that line calmly keeps its original lower rate completely untouched. So a raise absolutely never, under any circumstances, leaves you with less total take-home pay than before. Professor Money loves to draw this whole thing as a stack of buckets, definitely not one big tank. You fill up the first bucket at 10%, then the next one at 12%, and so on. Water only ever spills over into the higher bucket after the lower one below it is completely full. If your marginal rate happens to be 24%, a $1,000 raise is nowhere near gone. You still keep about $760 of it even before any state tax or FICA. That is still hundreds of very real dollars that you would have flatly refused out of pure fear. Your marginal rate is only ever the tax rate on your very next dollar, and honestly, nothing more. Your effective rate, on the other hand, is your total tax simply divided by your total income. And that effective rate is almost always dramatically lower than most people actually assume that it is. Priya's marginal rate was 22%, but her real effective rate sat much closer to 14%. Most people constantly confuse those two rates, and that simple confusion makes them turn down real money. So here is what nobody tells you. Fearing the brackets is far more expensive than the brackets ever are. Subsection 2 shows you where your paycheck actually goes, laid out in a few very plain buckets. Try to picture every single dollar that you earn quietly splitting itself off into 4 separate rivers. River number 1 is taxes, and it runs at about 30% for the average working person. That river never once touches your hands at all. It just leaves right at the source, automatically. River number 2 is your pre-tax benefits, meaning your 401k, your insurance premiums, and your HSA. This particular river always feels like a pure loss, but a real chunk of it is actually savings. River number 3 is your fixed costs. The rent, the car, the phone, utilities, and minimum payments. For most people, this fixed cost river is by far the widest one and also the hardest to move. River number 4 is the small little trickle left over at the very end, and everyone fights over it. That very last little river is what most people mistakenly go around calling their actual money. The real trick here is that rivers 1 and 2 are almost completely invisible to you on payday. You never see them leave, so you never grieve them, and so you honestly never even try to manage them. Priya could instantly recite her monthly rent right down to the exact dollar without a moment's thought. But she had absolutely no idea that her benefits were quietly taking $460 a check. The invisible rivers are almost always exactly the ones carrying the very most hidden, recoverable slack. A 10% cut to an invisible cost genuinely feels like almost nothing at all on payday. But it lands directly in the one single river you actually spend from, that tiny leftover one. That is precisely why auditing the invisible costs beats budgeting the visible ones, basically every single time. Most people do the exact opposite. They squeeze the daily coffee and completely ignore the benefits. Run the numbers honestly, and the truly big wins are almost always hiding somewhere quietly upstream. Subsection 3 is the inflation tax, the one sneaky tax that absolutely no one ever actually voted for. Even after all of those taxes, there is still one more quiet thief working on your real number. It is inflation, and it quietly shrinks every single dollar you own while it just sits there still. Between April 2021 and April 2023, inflation actually beat wage growth for 25 straight months in a row. For over 2 full years, workers were quietly getting poorer even as their paychecks were getting bigger. Your salary can climb 3% while prices climb 4%, and you have quietly lost ground. That is the truly cruel trick of it. The number went up, but the real number quietly went down. Priya's $7,000 raise honestly looked absolutely fantastic, sitting right there on the offer letter. But after taxes took their cut, that raise was really only about $4,800 actually kept. And after that same year's inflation finished with it, the true real gain was almost nothing at all. This is exactly why so many people feel completely broke while technically earning more money than ever. The paycheck keeps growing in raw dollars, but it quietly shrinks in what those dollars can actually buy. By 2026, wages finally edged back ahead, growing roughly a full point faster than prices were rising. But real hourly earnings were still sitting slightly below where they had been back in early 2021. 5 full years of hard work and purchasing power had really only barely clawed its way back to even. Inflation is basically a tax that you pay without any bracket, without any form, and without any vote. And it never shows up anywhere on your pay stub, which is honestly exactly what makes it so dangerous. The only real defense you have against it is owning things that reliably grow faster than prices do. Cash that is just sitting there completely still is really cash that is slowly melting in your hand. Most people carefully budget their dollars and completely forget that the dollars themselves are quietly shrinking. Subsection 4 is lifestyle creep, the almost completely silent killer of very nearly every raise you get. Here is the exact pattern that quietly traps almost every single person who ever manages to get a raise. The paycheck goes up, and then within about 2 short months, the spending quietly goes right up too. A slightly better apartment, a slightly nicer car payment, and just a few more little subscriptions. Every single one of those upgrades genuinely feels earned, and honestly, almost every one of them really is. But the whole raise quietly vanishes straight into fixed costs long before it ever builds any real wealth. Priya's raise back in March had added about $185 to every single check. But within roughly 8 weeks, a brand new car lease was taking almost exactly that same amount away. The money itself never actually disappeared. It just quietly changed its form from freedom into pure obligation. That is the real danger right there. Raises quietly become payments, and those payments basically never go away. A single one-time raise can quietly create a forever bill, and most people honestly never even notice. The couch is a one-time purchase. The car lease is basically a monthly subscription to just being broke. Denise's whole beautiful-looking life was quietly built almost entirely out of these exact same forever bills. Her income perfectly matched Priya's, but her monthly obligations had quietly gone and roughly doubled. The scariest part of all of it is just how perfectly reasonable every single decision looked on its own. Nobody ever wakes up in the morning and actually chooses to be broke on $90,000 a year. They just quietly say yes to good things a little bit faster than their raise can possibly support. The real fix here is not never upgrading at all. It is simply upgrading slower than your income grows. Try to bank the first half of every single raise before your lifestyle ever even gets to see it. Because whatever your lifestyle never actually meets in the first place, your lifestyle will honestly never once miss. Subsection 5 is the pre-tax superpower that you are honestly, almost certainly, dramatically underusing right now. Remember that big, scary tax river from earlier, the one that quietly takes 30% right off the top? Well, there is a fully legal way to shrink that river, and most people barely even touch it. Any money that you put in before taxes directly lowers the very income the government is allowed to tax. Put $1 into a traditional 401k, and it cleanly dodges that entire red tax river completely. For Priya, sitting at a 22% bracket, that is real, immediate, same-day savings on her money. Every single $100 that she defers quietly saves her about $22 in federal tax today. It is honestly the closest thing that exists to a fully legal discount stamped on your own paycheck. The HSA is somehow even better than that, being the only account taxed at neither end whatsoever. Money goes in untaxed, then it grows untaxed, and then it comes out untaxed for any medical costs. And yet almost nobody ever maxes it out, mostly because nobody ever explained what it actually even does. Priya, for her part, was quietly contributing 6% and simply assumed that was plenty enough. But her employer actually matched all the way up to 5%, free money she was leaving on the table. An unclaimed employer match is quite literally the only guaranteed 100% return that even exists. She had honestly been declining a small raise every single month without ever once even realizing it. Pre-tax accounts quietly turn the entire tax system from a scary enemy into a genuinely powerful tool. The very same buckets that quietly trap the confused will just as quietly reward the well-informed. You truly cannot out-earn a bad structure, but you absolutely can out-structure a fairly modest income. This is exactly how a careful nurse can retire far richer than a doctor who never once learned it. Run the numbers, and structure quietly beats raw salary far more often than almost anybody ever thinks. Subsection 6 is where you learn how to actually go and find your own personal real number. So just forget about the salary entirely. It is only ever a headline, never a real fact about your life. Pull up just one single real paycheck of yours and slowly read it all the way from top to bottom. First, write down the gross number, that big impressive one sitting right up at the very top. Then carefully list out every single pre-tax deduction, one by one, absolutely no skipping allowed. Then list out every single tax as well, the federal, the state, Social Security, and Medicare. Whatever number actually manages to survive all the way down at the bottom is your true take-home, your net. But we are honestly not even done yet, because that net pay still is not your real number. Now subtract out all of your fixed obligations, the bills that show up whether you like it or not. The rent, the car, the insurance, the phone, the minimum debt payments, all of the true non-negotiables. And whatever quietly remains after all of that is finally your real number, your actual free cash flow. That is the money that actually builds wealth, absorbs life's shocks, and buys you genuinely real choices. For Priya, that $90,000 salary quietly became a real number of only about $600. $600 every 2 weeks was the plain truth that her big salary had been hiding all along. It honestly sounds pretty small, but simply knowing it completely changed every single decision she made next. You truly cannot ever grow a number that you have never once actually sat down and looked at directly. Most people never once actually calculate this, and then they quietly wonder why real wealth feels so impossible. The real number is genuinely humbling to look at, but it is also exactly where all your power begins. Subsection 7 is all about how to go and give yourself the raise that your boss simply won't. Here is the part that finally flips this whole entire story around, from painful loss into total control. A single dollar that you simply stop losing is honestly worth even more than a dollar that you earn. The earned dollar always gets taxed on its way in the door. The saved dollar quietly never does. So quietly plugging one single leak actually beats chasing a whole raise. Straight up dollar for dollar. Priya canceled that old commuter benefit she had totally forgotten about, instantly recovering $40 a check. Then she captured the full employer match, quietly adding a stream of free money straight to her future. She refinanced absolutely nothing. She asked her boss for nothing, and she still boosted her real number. In just one single afternoon of careful auditing, she actually found over $300 every month. That is basically the exact equivalent of a raise, except this one required no permission from anybody at all. Every single forgotten subscription is really just a tiny paycheck that you are quietly mailing off to a stranger. Cancel just 3 of those subscriptions, and you have basically gone and hired your own self back part-time. The paycheck lies right to your face, but the pay stub quietly confesses everything if you actually read it. Most people honestly never once read it at all, but you are about to become the rare exception. Now for the part that almost no other finance channel out there will ever actually say right out loud. The real number is honestly not just about the math, it is about who actually gets to decide your life. Here is the deeply counterintuitive truth that stays buried underneath every single one of those deductions. The people who genuinely feel the richest are honestly rarely ever the exact same people who earn the most. They are instead the people who have the very widest gap between their income and their monthly obligations. A humble teacher carrying no debt at all can genuinely be freer than a surgeon drowning in payments. Real freedom was never about the raw size of your paycheck. It is about the size of your leftover. So here's the one quotable line. Freedom is not what you earn. It is simply what you keep. Two different people can earn the exact identical $90,000 and still go on to live opposite lives. One of them is trapped, counting the days until payday, one raise away from a relief that never comes. The other one is completely calm because her quiet real number comfortably covers her actual real life. The whole difference between them was never once the salary, it was the structure sitting right underneath it. This is exactly why endlessly chasing a bigger number so often completely fails to ever fix the feeling. You get the raise, your lifestyle immediately rises up to meet it, and the whole gap just stays closed. More income poured straight into that same old leaky structure honestly just ends up leaking a little faster. The wealthy people quietly figured out that keeping money is a real skill, completely separate from earning it. You can honestly be absolutely world-class at earning money and still be completely, hopelessly broke at keeping it. And you can be only pretty average at earning while quietly, steadily, patiently winning the whole game of keeping. Priya honestly was never underpaid at all. She was simply underinformed, and being underinformed is completely fixable. The very moment she finally saw her real number, all of that quiet shame quickly turned into a plan. She stopped comparing her real paycheck to Denise's public performance and started comparing it only to her own. That one single mental shift is honestly worth far more than most of the raises she will ever get. Because a raise that you simply cannot keep is really just a bigger number that still quietly disappears. The whole goal here was truly never some huge salary. It was always a wide, carefully protected gap. So guard that gap carefully, and the gap itself will eventually go and buy you back all of your time. That, right there, is the real number. And honestly, it was always the entire point of all of this. So here is exactly what to go and do tonight, before your very next payday actually rolls around. Pull up your single most recent pay stub tonight, and then slowly read every single line on it. Find your gross pay, then your deductions, then your taxes, and finally your genuine, honest, true take-home. Then subtract out all your fixed bills and go ahead and meet your real number completely face-to-face. It honestly might sting a little bit, and that small sting is really the true beginning of getting control. Then go hunt down just one single leak, one forgotten charge, and go completely shut it off this week. And capture your full employer match, especially if you happen to be leaving even a little of it behind. Because just like that, you have quietly gone and given yourself a raise that no boss ever had to approve. Do that one thing and the paycheck finally stops lying to you, because now you actually know the truth. So make the decision that actually matches your own reality, and not somebody else's polished little sales pitch. And if any of this finally helped you see your own money just a little more clearly, you belong here. So go ahead and subscribe to Coach Nora Money, and while you are at it, hit that notification bell. We break down the hidden math sitting behind all of the financial decisions that you face every single day. No hustle culture at all, and absolutely no shame, just the honest numbers nobody else will ever show you. Because your salary is really only ever a headline, but your real number is honestly the whole entire story. So go read your pay stub tonight, and go ahead and take your real number right back for good.